The sustainable livelihood approach improves understanding of the livelihoods of the poor. According to Oliver Surratt, it organizes the factors that limit or enhance livelihood opportunities and shows how they relate. It can be used as a tool for planning development activities and assessing the contribution that these existing activities have made in sustaining livelihoods. It is an approach that combines socioeconomic sciences with biological and environmental knowledge to offer a new way to think about the work of vulnerable populations. Hi everyone, my name is Luzaide Carrera and today we're going to analyze the effectiveness of the Sustainable Livelihoods approach in supporting sustainable human-environment interactions. First, we will go through a brief explanation of the concept, the elements, and some examples of this approach, and then we will move on to the critical section, where we will discuss some of the strengths and weaknesses of the framework. After the Second World War, colonizers retreated from their colonies and left them with very fragile economies. The sustainable livelihood approach emerged in 1990 as a response to obsolete development models that failed to address the high rates of poverty and the constant changes in the current world. Conservative approaches centered on three primary indicators: 1. Production, 2. Employment, 3. Cash flow. These metrics would exclusively address industrial realities while failing to capture the complexity of rural contexts. In contrast, the sustainable livelihood approach addresses this complexity by focusing on three fundamental objectives: 1. Capability, 2. Equity, and 3. Sustainability. Now, before delving into the framework, let's define the main concept. What is sustainable livelihood? According to Chambers and Conway's work paper, a livelihood comprises the capabilities, assets, and activities required for a means of living. A living is sustainable when it can cope with and recover from stress and shocks, maintain or enhance its capabilities and assets, and provide sustainable livelihood opportunities for the next generation. Now, let's explore the elements of the sustainable livelihood approach. This diagram from the UK Department of International Development demonstrates how these elements should be considered to comprehend the capability of achieving the required assets for a sustainable living. Starting with the pentagon in the middle, showing the livelihood assets: financial, physical, human, social, and natural. Not only does money have the main role, but also these other assets that can help people overcome difficult situations. For example, having a security network, support from your community, places to recover, etc. Over here, we have the external factors that can affect the capacity of getting these assets, such as shocks, stressors, and seasonality. The framework indicates that policies, institutions, and processes like social relations, market, and organizations can also facilitate or prevent people from achieving these assets. Finally, we have the outcomes for a sustainable livelihood, which include more income, increased well-being, reduced vulnerability, improved food security, better natural resource management, and community empowerment. Having examined the structural components of the Sustainable Livelihood Approach framework, let's now explore the core values that drive its implementation. In a very simple way, the principles are: 1. Putting people's social and economic activities at the center of the analysis, meaning that besides analyzing the resources like fish, cattle, or crops, it's important to analyze the way these resources interact with people's context, culturally, socially, economically, and politically speaking. 2. Transcend sectoral boundaries. This means that other factors like health, education, well-being, and security should be taken into account. 3. Making macro and micro links. This means that it should be considered the links that exist between local issues and national policies. 4. Being responsive and participatory. The framework looks for a real engagement with the community and other stakeholders, continuously promoting adaptive and learning approaches for a better management. 5. Building on strengths. The approach seeks to address these problems by taking advantage of people's existing capabilities. 6. Taking broad view of sustainability. The sustainability of these livelihoods should be approached from an economic, institutional, social, and environmental perspectives. Now that we have a full picture of what this approach is about, let's move on to a couple of examples where this framework has been applied. In a study by Blythe et al. 2014, researchers applied the sustainable livelihood approach to examine how two fishing communities in Mozambique responded to challenges like declining fish catches and socio-economic pressures. The researchers conducted a comparative analysis by documenting stressors, household assets, adaptation strategies, and influencing factors. Interestingly, their findings revealed that the community with greater assets, like better fishing equipment, boats, and governmental support, demonstrated higher fishing capacity but struggled to adapt when fish stocks declined. They became locked into their existing livelihood strategies. In contrast, the community with fewer assets, lacking boats, nets, and government assistance, showed greater adaptive flexibility. They developed diverse coping mechanisms, including household gardens, urban development, and other alternative income sources. This case illustrates how the sustainable livelihood approach effectively reveals the complex dynamics between human communities and their environment, highlighting how adaptive capacity can help communities to overcome external pressures and maintain their sustainable livelihoods. Another case study where the framework was applied was to understand the sustainability of 3 communities along the Migori River in Kenya: the upstream zone, middle stream zone, and downstream zone. Results suggested that the downstream zone has limited access to quality land, formal education, and lower financial and physical capital, adding to the fact that they are more exposed to the natural shocks like floods and droughts. On the other hand, the midstream area presented a higher sustainability level by having a stronger physical, social, and financial capital. The Sustainable Livelihood Framework in this case allowed the researchers to quantify and identify the assets that should be improved in each community to provide alternative livelihood activities, specifically for the downstream population, providing better access to land so the community can have continuous ecological and food supply. After these 2 examples, we can see that this approach can have multiple positive aspects. It brings a holistic perspective to analyze the livelihood of a community. It allows to identify priorities according to their assets. It promotes households to take advantage of their existing capabilities. It enhances the well-being, and it prioritizes how resources can support the community's livelihoods. However, the approach may present some limitations. Dr. Blythe points out how the approach requires significant time investment to properly understand community dynamics and the context, complicating the government funding and implementation. Additionally, Skuntz describes how the definition of livelihood is quite complex, since many perspectives can influence how you can see a sustainable way of living. This fact can mislead the research or focus on factors that may not apply to the community in question. Also, he mentions how complicated it is to create links between the local level and the broad level of institution and policies, making it very difficult to attend all the particularities from each community. After all this analysis, we can conclude that the Sustainable Livelihoods approach provides a comprehensive framework that effectively supports sustainable human-environment interactions by recognizing the complexity between communities and their resources. It also helps to enable researchers and policymakers to identify critical assets, vulnerabilities, and adaptive capacities that influence livelihood sustainability.